So we left off the last episode talking about debut album, and I want to now lead into the second album, Wow, which is an incredible album, and obviously it's got this incredible artwork right here. The lead up to Wow, my understanding is you wrote some of this stuff. You guys were all living in Malibu.
Some before we went to New York and recorded. Well, yeah, we were in Malibu for a bit of a time. But some of these songs were written from Jerry and I when we were still down on the peninsula, even before we had, met Moby Grape or had the band been established. So, but we wrote some in Malibu also.
Which ones were pre Grape that you and Jerry did?
Well, Murder in My Heart for the Judge, I
Hmm.
guess, is probably the best example, you know. So that was written quite a while before we even, got together with the rest of the guys.
And that's a true story coming from your heart, right?
That's a true story. I think we explained that before, right?
No,
When
no,
we
we didn't
talked
go
about
into it in
that.
this one. I've heard the story before, but for the listeners who may not know, who may know the song not only from the Wow album, but maybe Lee Michaels version or the Three Dog Night version, they might not know the story behind it and how it generated. So I'd love you to share that.
Well, I think the interesting thing is like I was asked to be part of a band here in Toronto, year before last that did a Led Zeppelin cover. That we were doing a night with Led Zeppelin with a a bunch of really great local musicians. And so they asked me to join in and to do some harmonies and, play a little bit of this or that. And so I had the unique experience of covering Led Zeppelin on a song that they covered of mine that I wrote.
Amazing.
So I sang one of my own songs, honoring a covering of Led Zeppelin doing "Murder in My Heart" for the Judge. So I think that's a good "Murder in My Heart" for the Judge story.
That's amazing. I mean, are you able to share real quick just the actual backstory of, you know,
But I would like to say it was like protesting, the injustice of the 60s towards, minorities and the Vietnam War, but it wasn't that noble. I just got a traffic ticket, and the traffic ticket was for expired license, and maybe my tabs were out of date, but it was like, I was, man, I was just like oblivious, driving around with expired tabs, and I didn't have my, license with me at the time. So I had a court date, and I went to the court date and went into the courtroom, and it did happen to be a nice day, and there was a number of people before me, and a very attractive young woman, which I was glad to see, went up before the judge with I guess the situation was very much like mine. She had expired tabs and also didn't have her license with her. And the judge just reprimanded her and said that I need you to get back to court and have proof of updating your license tabs and proof of your driver's license, and this will be suspended. So a couple of other people went by, and then I went up and I had the same thing. And it's a little bit like if today if I had my cheek pierced and my nose pierced and,
right?
a tattoo on my forehead and, red spiky hair or something. Because at that time, although it's very common now and looks very tame, I had long hair. And and uh and so that triggered the judge some way. Maybe he didn't have a nephew or a son or anybody that long, or if he did, those guys weren't behaving very well. But he looked at me and he kind of passed down like a severe fine and a suspended sentence and sent me off. And I drove home and I went, that's, I guess it was about injustice, but it wasn't
Yeah,
very noble. It
yeah.
was just petty. And so I started writing a song about, the big fat judge wouldn't budge. And actually, the first lines were actually, and we decided not to go, so fat old bastard wouldn't budge. But we calmed it down and just said the fat old judge wouldn't budge. And, that he said, if you look like me, I'd be your friend. Give me your money, give me your time. I don't want to see your ugly face again. So Murder My Heart for the Judge, I went, saw Jerry, and he just like laid down this real simple chord pattern. And I started with the melody, and told him a story, and we just built on it. And the next thing you know, we had Murder My Heart for the Judge all ready to go, and no place to put it.
Amazing, amazing song. And when you guys were writing and starting to record, how was the band unity? 'Cause I know, this was the last time before Granite Creek that the five of you were together doing an album.
Well, we could have been like more of a brotherhood than we were at the time. It was kind of like segmented, there was like little camps, but none of us, no, I mean, there wasn't any enmity among us. We weren't like, but just we couldn't get along too very well anymore. There was like a lot of stuff happening, and we were not with the same exact enthusiasm that we had on our first album. There's a lot of water under the bridge, of which I don't, historically it's already documented. But when we were in Malibu, we did have some good times. We went to some parties up there and saw some of the other guys from the Birds and hung out with them and with some other notables and played some music. We even had a day 24 hours, I think, maybe it was even more than that, where we decided to fast, only it wasn't fast and pray, it was just not talk. So we decided we were not going to speak for at least to each other. And then after that, we got a lot accomplished. And when we were in the studio, I had one of my, Skippy was just full of vinegar and pep and energy and great ideas. And so I did have a really cool time with Skippy working on Someday. I know that's a song where people sometimes can't tell who's singing. That's because him and I sat in a stairwell in New York City at the Columbia Studios and worked on it until we could breathe exactly the same way, say the exact intonations, you know, phrase it exactly the same way, because we wanted to be able to make it sound like there was just one person. And it was just a symbolic gesture of, of just being of us being one person, and then Mosley ruined everything by coming in the middle and sounding like Caruso, you know. So in the middle of that, but it was just magnificent. Mosley interrupts with this burst of like
Yeah.
operatic power, and then we go back to like, to the verses. And we had some. I mean, look, we had some great people come in the studio. We had Bert and Dr. John, Matt Rabenak at the time,
Yeah.
and we played some songs with him. We used to play a couple of his songs way before he was popular as the Frantics. We played a couple of his songs. He was so funky. So he was a big, he was like a big kind of a musical hero of ours. Joe Johansson came down from Seattle. He came in the studio, and we Doug got to play with JoJo. He's like the godfather of guitar players up in Seattle in that time, and of course Bloomfield and those guys came in, and we got to dig them, and then Skip went down and got the introduction for his unusual song with what's his name, Arthur Godfrey came in
Yeah.
and did the introduction to Just Like Gene Autry, and so there was a lot of really, and Dave was producing it, and so he was always the adult in the room, and he had a good sense of humor and knew how to get the best out of us. So, I saw it, other than being overproduced, there's some merit to that album. It's pretty good, but there is some overproduction and a few things that kind of we went with with the times,
Yeah.
which was which you should never do. If anybody wants any advice, don't go with the times. Just go with your own reality and what you believe is true. So, and most of it was pretty solid. The The bonus album is nonsense. That was,
The Jam album, this one.
in my opinion, it's like absolute nonsense.
Tell me why.
There's
I happen to love it. I love this album. Tell me why
Well,
you garner
why
that.
would not a chance, man? I'm not going to mess up anything for you, Scott.
No, so what this is, here's why I love it. Here's why I love it. I'll tell you. You lay out in the back what this album is. The music of this album just happened at various odd hours all through the sessions for the real album. I mean, to me, this is like young guys who have great musical ability, jamming, playing, having fun, being loose. I don't know if that's what was happening in the studio if you're all being, but it sounds authentic. It sounds vibey. And Led Zeppelin, even pulled some of Never for Since I've Been Loving You on their first album.
Yeah, exactly. So that's good. I mean, Never is really cool.
Yeah,
And he just, I think David just kept the tapes rolling while we were in the studio jamming, right?
yeah,
And so some of it is meaningless and just drivel. There's probably 10 minutes in there that is really interesting, and we really worked off of each other. But it was just like introducing ourselves to one another musically. And so a lot of the introduction was like, just like when you're introduced to somebody new and you're interested in them, there's a lot of stuff that's kind of like, well, how did you get here and what's your name? And then maybe there's something important said. And so in the midst of that, there's some things that are important. Never is one of them. And then again, like I said, I think there's merit to some of that jam, but the part that could have been cut, I wish would have been cut. That's all. It's just you know, not interesting to me in particular. But if somebody else enjoys it, man, I'm really glad, because
yeah.
it's got
I do.
it does
I
have
do.
merit. Good, good, good.
And
How about
I think this is one of the first Super Session albums. I think Cooper, after this, put out his Super Session with Steve Stills and Bloomfield. He put out one with Shuggy Otis, but this one was
right?
even before. How did was it? How did Bloomfield and Cooper get involved? Were they just around the studio and joining?
Yeah, that they just came in when we were there, right? And it just was kind of like, hey man, let's play something. And so they just sat down and played, and we just started jamming, right? So it was just by invitation, and they just showed up, and obviously we were really happy to see them, and had great regard for them and their stuff that they do. And so it seemed natural that we should and just sit down and play some music together.
I heard, well, somebody sent me, before I did the podcast, I asked my community if, for questions I could ask you. And and some of them I've asked previous, and I'll ask some more in the future. But this one was interesting, and I don't know if it's true, and I'd love to ask you. They said they heard the original name for Wow was supposed to be Mom. Is that any recollection of truth?
Well, that would be turning mom upside down, I
Right,
guess.
right,
And
yeah.
we kind of did turn mom upside down, but I think we were going to call it Mom and Apple Pie.
Mom and
It
Apple.
was, and there's an album cover that you can see sometimes I've seen it a few times online, that has each of us dressed up in unusual outfits. Like the Skippy was in a space uniform, and I was in a military uniform, and I think Jerry was as a American Indian, and it was each of us had kind of a symbolic good old American icon that we were dressed after, and then there was this kind of like sweet little old lady holding out an apple pie. So that's what it was originally supposed to be, and
Amazing.
so that'd have been a cool album cover, but I don't think it would have been up for any awards.
Amazing. And then the other thing I read, and this was from an interview with Peter, he said that the Wow album ultimately got its title because David Crosby saw you all play, and he exclaimed, "Wow" about that. Does that ring any bell to you as well?
I'm sure that's what happened.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, I
So,
didn't. It's not my experience, and I didn't have any idea of why it was named that. So, but hey man, Peter's got, he's got some great great stories,
Oh yeah, all you guys do. You guys live some amazing, amazing times. Made some amazing music, and obviously interacted with the amazing musicians of of music history. So I love all these stories you're sharing. I appreciate them all.
Oh, thanks, Scott.
Now
You know,
I want to talk a little about Skip because the Wow was the last album you guys recorded together before Granite Creek, and when you guys were on tour, and correct me if the timeline was wrong, when you guys were on tour, whereas you guys you were in New York, and Skip had his breakdown. Is that he was in New York, right?
yeah, that was we came back to play, at the Fillmore East, um, right after that album, and it was kind of the closing of Fillmore East. It was the last weekend, I believe, with us and BB King and a number of other people on it, and that's kind of like, you know, uh, that's when Skippy started to go a little bit off the rails, and had he had a place down in Greenwich Village. And I went down to see him because he wanted to, at that point, he had let it be known to, I think, to Bob that he wanted to start a new band. And he wanted Bob in it, right? He wanted Bobby to be in it. And so he hadn't been around. He didn't come around for rehearsals and didn't come around for a little while we were in New York. We were staying at the Albert Hotel, and he was there. And then he left the Albert Hotel and went down and stayed with this warlock, this woman who is like, you know, fed him some badass drugs. I can tell you that he got a hold of some bad drugs. And and while we were there, we were also doing some recording, not necessarily as a group, just going up and, Peter would go up and maybe lay down a track, and Jerry and I were up there doing, I think we were recording the song called Texas, which is a pretty funny song. I like that song. It actually got um, it actually got on an album, and it wasn't finished. It was still just like mistakes, and we just laughed at the mistakes, and actually makes it a little more interesting.
Yeah.
But so Skippy, like I said, I think he got a hold of some psychedelics and some really bad drugs, and uh, I think Tim Delaire, when we were rehearsing, I think um, the time we were rehearsing at the Fillmore, Tim Delaire said that this woman came up and gave him a note to pass to Skippy, and it was a note that just said that, you can't do this anymore. You can't be on the fence anymore. You have to make up your mind of who you are and where you want to go and all that stuff. And she said, you can't be in this band. And that's the woman that he went with. When I went down to see him, I went down to the Village because, he hadn't been around for most of the times when we were there. And when I went in, it was like one of those walk down little Village apartments. And they had an old guy laying on the couch, like, he looked more like probably what you'd call a street person today, a fella that, might have fallen into hard times. And so we were sitting at the kitchen table, and and Skippy said, I want to start a new band. And then he said, maybe you should be in it, man. We should. And I said, man, come on, what are you doing? We got a gig here and we're playing Moby Grape, and uh, she pipes in and says, Skippy, you tell him the truth, tell him what's going on, And so Skippy says, yeah, I'm quitting. I don't want to, I'm not in Moby Grape anymore, and she said, this guy over here, he's like our sage or whatever. And so we've been asking him questions and he's been giving us the answers. And so it was just weird. It was just weird. And he was like I said, filled with a lot of um, badass. I think he was doing some heavy drugs, and he got a hold of some bad stuff. So ultimately, the story, as that Jerry and I are up at the studio, and Skippy went down to visit us took the fire axe off the wall and chopped a hole in the door, and it's kind of like here's Johnny, kind of like one of those. And I mean, you have to have again, you have to have compassion and understand that Skip had mental issues, um, before that, but I mean, those things were part of I mean, it's like Kanye West. The guy is like says some incredibly brilliant things, and you put up with this other stuff because brilliance demands attention. And if it's brilliant and it creates these beautiful things, then you look at the beautiful things and say, that's the price we pay for this. And that's like Skip for all the time up until then, is you'd have to pay a price maybe, but he was filled with joy and filled with laughter and filled with anger and filled with love and filled with all of these beautiful things and would create these wonderful moments musically that you had to like just not only endure, but be glad to be part of, but it went off the rails. And so you just have to think that, that God was like, merciful, both to him in a way, yeah, to him and to me and to anybody else who could have been in his way. Matter of fact, I called my Indian granny. That was Paulus, my wife at the time. That was her grandmother. And I don't know if I told you about my beads that had around. It's the
No.
funniest thing, man. When
No.
I went to see her, she lived up in Northern California. They had a little ranch up there, and she's First Nations woman, not completely, but mostly. And they had a little kind of a chicken farm with grapes and large vegetable garden and all that. And we went up to visit her and her husband. And so she gave me this thing. This was like 1966 or 7 or whatever. So she gave me this it almost looked like a rosary. It was beautiful little blue beads and they came together and then there was a little blue beads that came down and I wore it, and and she just said this will protect you. This is good luck. So it was so funny because every time I did something wrong, it seemed like it would break. And it gets till it's like a choker, it's over the years. So when this happened, I was really terrified, right? Because I don't know. Like I said, that this Skip is at this point with whatever's going on. He's on a different level. I don't know if he knows where I am or doesn't know where I am or knows where Jerry and I are or where we are going. But I didn't want to run into him, at that point. And so I called Indian Granny. I said, Granny, this guy is, he's one of our band members has just gone off the deep end and came at our door in the Albert Hotel with a fire axe. And I said, what should I do? What can we do? And she said, you get down on your knees. And so I got down on my knees. She said, I want you to plead the blood of Jesus on you and on your friend, on him. And that almost freaked me out at the time as much as the whole event. But I did that. And Jesus has protected me and cared for me all these days of my life. And I serve him actually. But that was kind of the first time that he was introduced in such a powerful way to give comfort and relief and safety and to be a place of refuge for those that were involved in that instance. So that's the story that happened in New York.
And then so Skip was taken away. I'm guessing you guys did these shows in the Fillmore and you kept on. Was there any question of whether you guys were going to wait for Skip to come back, or were you just going to carry
Well,
playing?
we did that show. We did the show with Skippy was with us when we did that
Oh, we
show,
did. Okay.
but it
Yeah.
was a nightmare. It was awful. Skip, I think we threw stuff into the audience and, you know, Bob played in one key when we were in a different key, and it was, I mean, that the rehearsal went okay, but that gig it was a disaster, and Bill Graham took us back in the back room and said, "You guys will never work in this business again as long as I have anything to say with it." You know, you
Wow.
did this, so it was not a great event. And when Skippy was sent to you know, they took him to the tomb, what they called the tombs, and it was a place, for mentally ill people, and so we were told that that he wasn't going to get out anytime right away, and so we just kind of went our separate ways, and for all intents and purposes, this kind of broke up until we went back to do Moby Grape 69. And we did that without Skip. We were always, you know, we always paid tribute to him, because we would, we do a song of his like All My Life, or put Seeing on one of the albums when he wasn't there. But it we didn't know if he would come back, and it looked like after did come out, that he was not interested in coming back to the band per se, and so that's kind of like how the thing tailed off, you know. So by the way, Skippy and I ended up, there was a resolution. I saw him any number of times after that. Once, right when he came back to Santa Cruz, all right, back to Santa Cruz Mountains up in Boulder Creek. I saw him, and we were okay. And then later on in his life, I saw him where he was living in a trailer, with this wonderful woman that just rescued him and loved him, and we talked and had a beer, and it was good. So yeah, so that was kind of the end of that part, and then we went on as indestructible. It was like, we went on as a four-piece band from then on
Yeah.
until we added Gordon, and Skippy came up for 20 Granite Creek. So that's kind of like, how that works.
And Moby 69 was the last album you guys did, obviously before Granite Creek, with Bob. Bob skipped out on Truly Fine Citizen. And I want to actually talk about Truly Fine Citizen if we can, because I love them all. I love that one. And I want to ask you about working, you did that album in 3 days in Nashville, working with
Yeah.
Bob Johnston. Bob Johnston did Johnny Cash. He also did some Bob Dylan, right?
Yep.
Yeah, amazing. So what got you guys out to Nashville and working with Bob, and any remembrances of that experience?
Well, it was an obligation from Columbia that we had to make that record, and they were not interested in Moby Grape in the least, and there was no budget to speak of, and they were not enthusiastic about it, and we really did our best. We did the best we possibly could under the circumstances. Like I said, it was a 3-day experience. And if you listen to the bones of the songs, if we would have had 7 days and Bobby there, and some time to rehearse, I think that album could have been like really good, really good, because the bones were good. It just didn't have the time to be able to work counterpoints or change this or work on it. So it was done in 3 days. Um, and I playing with Bobby Moore, that was really cool. He was like he produced it and he played bass, and he was just a gentleman. He was like he just. I think again, I just like David. I think he got the best out of us for what we could do, and although it was maybe not the most loved album, to me it was my most fun album we did. As you saw, the cover is
Yeah.
the policeman sitting there with his feet up and saying "Truly Fine Citizen," and so that was simply because we would go outside and smoke some doobies at the time, and he would just turn the other way and make sure nobody bothered us. He was really cool. And if you look at the back, there's a picture of Peter and Jerry and I, and then our road manager, Tim Bellera. This is where our mental head was. We wouldn't even take credit for the songs that we wrote because we were afraid that Matthew would have, taken uh, taken over taken the publishing and the royalties and all of that. So we gave credit to all the songs we wrote to Tim Bellera, who was our road manager, who
Right.
was a trusty right-hand man. Boy, he's a good guy to have around. And one time him and Bobby Moore. So we gave him all the credit. But what I loved about Tennessee is I just loved Tennessee. We did drop some acid while we were there, and it was just a beautiful city. I never seen a firefly before.
Yeah.
We'd get up, we have biscuits and gravy, and have there was great food. The neighborhoods all had enclosed porches, and people were picking music, and you could hear music when you're walking around neighborhoods. People playing live. There's people out in the streets. It was just awesome. Matter of fact, I just wrote a song about two kids in the 50s that were in love in Tennessee and got married when they were 15. And it tells their story in Tennessee evenings and folks walking by and music in the air and fireflies. And so it just had an impact on me. I loved that place, and still have obviously fond memories. And so the album, again, if you pick and choose some of the songs, I think there was Peter did some really cool going on down to Texas, and so. But it's a hard album to. You have to kind of it's not like Aura, because Aura is just like in a different world. I mean,
Yeah.
you have to be open to the different world.
Yeah.
But for this you have to be patient. You have to listen and see what and kind of hang into what is going on, because there's some good stuff in there.
I want to ask about Or. Did any of those songs that Skip was ultimately put on that, were those songs that you had known, or those were considered as Grape songs? Or were these all songs he wrote, as far as you know, during his time in the hospital?
Yeah, I think those were all written
All.
by for him when he was in the Tombs. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, great, great.
Yeah, yeah. What a trip.
Yeah.
And then after Truly Fine Citizen, did you feel, because there was a break between there and Granite Creek, was there a sense that might have been the end of the Grape, or were you all just reconstituting your mojo?
No, that was the end of the Grape.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all went off. I played with Red Erickson and played with a little band called Swifty Toulouse, and just we all just went off and did what we did, but there wasn't any Moby Grape anymore. So that was the end of that.
And then what became the impetus to reunite for Granite Creek?
Well, I think Dave Rubinson and he kind of put it together, I think. That with Warner Brothers this time, not Columbia, and that it was worthwhile because there was still some interest in the band, because we did create somewhat of a little minor legacy at that time for just being pioneers and playing the way we played. And so it was a glimmer of hope in the midst of all that, that we should probably try and create an album. We all had songs because we didn't stop writing. And so we rented a home at 20 Granite Creek, which was a monastery at one time, and it had 4 or 5 bedrooms in it, and an old wood stove and fireplaces in the bedrooms, and probably an acre or plus of land and landscape. And you'd have to drive in for 100 yards off the highway to be able to get to the house. And so it was just a cool place. I had my birthday there. Wow, what a party that was. That was really cool. And so, you know, so they brought in Ed Banyan, as an engineer. They drove in a big truck with a recording studio in it, and then they ran all the wires and all the gears and everything from the truck into the living room, which we baffled up and separated, drums and all that stuff, and had a recording studio that could be where we could play in the living room right off the front door, and be able to record there. That was really really cool. So this was a location that was set up to be able to be the best vibes and the best sense of well-being that we could possibly explore. Skippy was there and did the brilliant Chinese song. Are you kidding me? I mean, come on, man. That thing sounds more authentic than the real deal. I mean, you listen, and it's the most free I've ever been playing drums. I mean, if you listen to it, it is just it's like some kind of classical piece that should be used in some film about the sun rising in China, and the emperors. And I mean, this is like an amazing piece of music. However, he did have his buddies up there, you know, cooking meth in the outbuilding that he was staying up in oh shit, I can't think of the name of it at the moment. But anyway, that there was he wasn't staying at the house. Um, but anyway, there's some guys there that were cooking meth. This is right before the van showed up, right when we were living there. And Mary Keeter, who was my my lady at the time, and she was she's a tall woman who was just strong, hard woman, no kidding. And I was off playing music or whatever. I came back and she had ran them off. She took an iron pan and a iron, I don't know, some sort of like kitchen tool, and went out there to that place, opened up the door and started banging it, banging the damn thing, and said, "You guys, get the hell out of here, take whatever you're doing and don't ever come back," and bang, bang, bang. She just stood up there and they all just like with kids that were just caught doing the wrong thing. They just packed up their stuff and just left and didn't come back. That was remarkable. So yeah, so she was a big, she was like a frontier woman. She was like awesome. That was so great. She's a great, great lady. So the rest, that did have some of the same components as the first one. It was a rebirth. It was a little bit of a
Yeah.
rebirth. And then Gordon Stevenson joined us, and Gordon was a great addition. He had played in, I think he had played in the San Jose Symphony. His parents had owned this fantastic music store down in San Jose. He was an accomplished bass player, accomplished violinist. And he had befriended Skip, and him and Skip were playing. See, Skippy was clean for a long time, after he got back, and he had become friends with Gordon, and Skippy had plans to create an opera way before anybody else wanted to create it. He had the stadium figured out, the theater, it'd be a glass stage, and people would wear uh, green and white outfits, which would talk about ecology and about the connection between man and his environment. And they were playing music that Skippy was writing. They played in some churches, they played in some coffee houses. They had some stuff going on, man,
Wow.
until he ran into these guys up in I should be ashamed of myself. I can't think of the name of the place up in the Santa Cruz Mountains where a lot of drug addicts and a lot of bikers and a lot of people hung out. And Gordon tells a story about that he went to pick up his medication because this medication was working, and so Skippy wasn't suffering from some of the demons that had haunted him, and like I said, him and Gordon were really breaking through to the possibility of just unbelievable new chapter in his life, which I feel robbed of actually. Um, but I guess he said one time when he picked up his medication, he said they were driving up to San Jose, and Skippy rolled down the window and just threw him out. Said, "Yeah, I'm done with that crap." So, but back to 20 Granite Creek. So Gordon joined us, and I think that Horse Out in the Rain is like, so it's so intertwined with like a lot of skills, and Peter writes and still writes. One of my favorite lyricists of all times. He writes great lyrics. And Jerry and I, he had was it Treat Me Bad? I love that country song.
Mhm.
It's so cool the way it changes chords and the way. And so we got together and we sang together and practiced, and then we'd go in and record. And so there was some of that magic that I think this depends what day it is. That's sometimes my second favorite album. Sometimes it's Legendary Grape that we didn't do until the 90s, and sometimes it's 69. So, but all those are on the same level to me. Um, so yeah, so 20 Granite Creek was just a breath of possibilities and filled with kind of hope. And it didn't, of course it didn't work out. It was Moby Grape. But we made some good music.
Amazing music. That legendary Grape album, I actually need to check out. Until you mentioned it, I hadn't even, I didn't know that thing existed. So tell me, is that, and I read about it after you like created 500 tapes originally of it, and then eventually it ended up on CD. Do you guys like own the rights to that? Is that something that might come out eventually on record, on vinyl?
Should be re-released because I mean there's Dan Abernathy joined us, and he's a awesome guitar player and good singer, and Jerry was there and Bob was there and Peter was there, and there's just great songs on that album that I have a real soft spot for. And Peter always comes through. So if you get a chance, listen to it because I think it has merit.
Yeah, it's not available on any streaming service, and it's not available on vinyl.
But
And then,
originally it was just done. We just did 500 cassettes, and we did a tour. We did a full tour all down, Pacific Coast. We had a great time and sat at the table and, you know, hand painted with the colors of the cassettes, and so we did a 3 4 week tour. It was pretty authentic and really some good musical moments. There's not a song on there I don't like. Mosley was awesome. So was Peter. And
that's cool.
Jerry, of course. Gotta love Jerry.
Was that the no? There was another reunion you guys did because I was there at South by Southwest, but that didn't have Bob involved, right?
Well, no, it's just Jerry and
It was
myself,
Jerry
and
and you.
then Skippy's son Omar, and
Mhm.
then the guys from Mellencamp. We got down there. We got down there about a week before we played at the Dirty Dog Cafe, and so we had a great rehearsal time. And so by the time we got on stage, and you got Johnny G and Dane Clark from Mellencamp, uh, and so it came out really, really good. And it was interesting. Peter was over at a different club with
Mhm.
um, Freddie Kirk, and his great. He's like a legend in Austin, and so he had a little band, and him and Peter were over there doing, Peter songs. I don't know why, but somehow, that kind of like was a separation there that we shouldn't have been. We should have all been playing together, but we were all making our own plans on our own way, right? I don't think Peter wasn't too crazy about Dane and what we were doing there with the unknown and unreleased Moby Grape album that still is unreleased, the Real Potato. And so we were in the midst of doing all that recording, and so Peter was over there with Freddie, and we were over there with Dane at the Dirty Dog. But it was like, yeah, it was a good reunion. And there's been other reunions on and off over the years. It's just and there's going to be one here on kind of like, it's the last reunion. It'll be the last get together, but it's on June 22nd down in Petaluma, where we're going to send off Jerry as a musical farewell with a number of original members and like a lot of the kids, Joseph and possibly Omar and maybe and Erwin and Peter's daughter and then and then Dad Abernathy, who I spoke of earlier, and Gordon Stevens is coming up, and there's going to be a lot of people that have played with Jerry over the years, and they were just going to do a concert in Petaluma on the 22nd. By the time people hear this, that'll probably be over, but it'll be a great event of like a lot of love and a lot of good music.
I can't wait for it. Will you be doing any of your own solo music from the Limited Engagement Volume 2 at the show?
I think I might do Chicken Steak because I think Jerry would love that one, man. I think, so mostly I'm going to play songs that we wrote, but I'll probably do a couple songs of my own from either Limited Engagement or from, Buskin' in the Subway or King of Fools.
I love
So I'll
it.
probably do something original.
How often are you going out and performing these songs from the previous albums and the new solo album? Are you doing shows up near you, Toronto?
Well, it's in my cynical moments, I just say I got this album out just in time for nobody to care. You know, but but the truth is that I get to play. I have been over the years since I've been in Toronto. I played a lot of gigs out at night and in a lot of the bars and with some great musicians and really had some fantastic nights, playing music. And I played a lot of busking in the subway. I still do that. Played a lot of festivals, little small farmers markets and those kinds of things. Um, but now I can't drive at night because you know, I have macular degeneration, and so it's okay. I'm not complaining. It's just like body parts wear out as you get older. But so I'm really not playing very many night gigs, and but when I get an opportunity to play, I play. So, but I practice and I write and record
Love it.
and play. I play. You know, periodically I go down to the subway and play music down there too. So that's because steady gig because I have a license.
Does anybody recognize you at all, or do you ever play a Moby Grape song and people stop and say, "Oh, I know this"? Or, is this the guy?
No, no, they're just all in a hurry, and
Yeah,
you're just there to maybe make people's day a little bit better.
that's phenomenal. And the label that you released this on, Sound Sweet Records, do you have involvement in that, or is it primarily just a vehicle to release your work?
No, I'm fully vested in that, along with Norm Evans, who's kind of been my manager. And I always tell you, man, it's interesting. This guy got a hold of me about 4 years ago, and we started doing some stuff together. And he's a visionary. He's a wild man. But it doesn't matter, man. It doesn't matter if you're 10 years old or if you're 80 years old. If you have somebody that really believes in you,
Yeah,
it's really a good thing. So I wish for everyone that they find somebody that totally believes in them because, you know, that that can help propel you into, to doing some things that are just like amazing, right? So I got to play in Massey Hall here in Toronto, which is like the Albert Hall through
yeah,
Norm's
yeah.
been he's like just he's pushy and funny and creative and then these guys in Jerusalem, Jamie Clarkston Clark and Ellie Shore that they have a studio in Jerusalem and one's an engineer and Jamie's a great musician and they did the production and we've accomplished a lot without any budget because I really don't have a bunch of dough. But there's been this cooperation with Sound Sweet Music, and so we're all vested in it. And Norm is running half of my publishing, and so these guys have just been gracious and mixed and mastered, and we've done all this from Toronto, recording here and then sending it there, and them adding pieces and coming back, and then me making suggestions, and then taking out this part and sending it to Cam McInnes, who's like a monster guitar player from Toronto. And so we have just, and Dane Clark's been playing on some of these songs from the Mellencamp. And so it's been one of my favorite things in the world to do is to record this music and to find that there's people that are great fans that really still love it and appreciate it. And I still love them and appreciate them. So that's kind of like what I'm doing right now.
Amazing. Well, I appreciate the music, and I hope there's another volume or another record. And I look forward to plan on coming out for the June
But
show. So I look forward to seeing you and seeing some of the music.
well, I'm going to do. I don't know if I can right now finance another. I've still got. I've got plenty of songs to do another album, but and that may not happen. But it's okay. But I'm going to do a fundraiser, and I want to do an album called Thank You, Lord, where I've got like a lot of songs written, and so I'm excited about that. Thank you for the interview. And like I said, I'm not going to do any more of these unless it's really something special. And so I appreciate your knowledge and your questions. And it was easy to talk to, and I appreciate it. And
Thank you,
so
brother. I
thanks for
appreciate it.
having me.
Thank you for listening to the Legends podcast by All Day Vinyl. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate it, share it, subscribe, and follow us and check us out at All Day Vinyl on Instagram and YouTube.